long as we remind him.
And then
Can I laugh?
Yes.
I'll be next to you, so I'll be like, I can't do that on stage, but now I can. So I'm gonna turn around and be like,
Do what I give the
Mark.
mom vein.
Mark.
Settle down. This is not the time nor the place.
I'll be the babysitter.
Be nice to her. She's fragile.
My mom might tell you that.
I was at a conference once. I'm recording this, but I shouldn't be. I was at this conference once,
He said he wouldn't know that.
and this girl, this woman was giving a paper, and it was just absolutely horrible. Just like and she was so nervous, which made it even worse because but she had really nothing to say and was nervous about it. And I'm in the back with this woman who I've been friends with for a long time, who is now at Rice University in Houston. She goes, "I am going to tear her apart." And I said, "She's no friend of mine. Please don't. She's a nice girl." So, okay, so she went up and talked to her afterwards, but she was just going to you've got nothing, right? It was a bad talk. And I talked her out of so you'll be that to me, and say, don't.
But it's my word, so.
So you'll say, clap loud for this one.
Well, I have pamphlets with my name on it.
I've never been. You see, I don't know how this whole thing
So
works.
it goes, and then it has a description and who made it. So as long as you follow the program, you'll know when to clap and when to laugh.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And I think now is the time to get into this instead. You have plenty of time in your fashion classes to talk about that. I don't come into your fashion classes. My time now.
You should, though.
We're coming over here. I know, I liked it. But they, Jan and I. All right, we were talking about Dada, and we'll finish up Dada today and move on to Surrealism. We were looking at, we had spent a lot of time with Duchamp as well. We should, because he's really an important thinker and artist for Dada and very influential in the ideas he's thinking about. Picabia was good friends with him back in Paris, where they were both part of that Cubist offshoot group, right? The group working in Puteaux, we called them the Golden Section. Part of them became the Orphists, right? But they're picking up on futurist ideas. That's really strong in that one particular Cubist offshoot. Our futurist ideas about movement, about action within the picture. And both of these pictures incorporate the moving figure in a sort of Cubist futurist way, right? So there are kind of two sides to that Golden Section group, right? There's the Orphist side, and then there's the kind of the futurist side. And there's a huge area in the middle of that Venn diagram where you're kind of both, right? Okay. So these two works were hung side by side in the Golden Section show in 1912 in Paris. And they were hung side by side in the Armory show in New York in the next year, in 1913. And Duchamp's work was a huge scandal in 1913, which I think Duchamp probably loved, right? The hubbub around it. Well, isn't it Oscar Wilde that said there's no such thing as bad press, right? A negative, they're paying it. What's worse is to have people pay no attention, right? When you talk about Karen would get a nasty email from someone, I say, just don't write back. That's better, right? You're not giving them attention, right? So anyway, long and the short of it is, I'm sure he loved getting that kind of scrutiny. Duchamp did, and Picabia, I'm sure, is picking up on it because he's hanging. Like I said, the work is hanging immediately next to it. Jamie, is that paint? No, this is digital.
What?
This is digital. This is a screen, and these are light pixels. Yeah, this is a painting, yes. Yeah. No, Jamie's next question is is that an asshole? Why, yes. Yes, it is.
And he wonders why we're behind.
Okay, so Picabia and Duchamp both moved to New York, right? This is where New York Dada starts, is with these two guys who had come out of that Cubist group and moved to New York in 1915. And when Picabia and Duchamp moved there, they both fall into the circle of this guy named Alfred Stieglitz, who is an art dealer, runs a gallery at 291 Fifth Avenue. And it's called Gallery 291, right? Or just 291. The name of the gallery is its address. And Stieglitz is a renowned photographer. And this is the view out the back window of 291. He's really well known for these sort of beautifully framed images of modern life. Right, that's his métier. He's also well known for being Georgia O'Keeffe's husband. Right, in addition to this, right? But beyond, and in the same way I wouldn't talk about Georgia O'Keeffe as only being Alfred Stieglitz's wife, Stieglitz has something to offer on his own, as does she, right? And we'll come back to Stieglitz because for modern painting in America, Stieglitz is a real central figure, right? And for more than just marrying Georgia O'Keeffe, right? His gallery, Gallery 291, was really the only outpost for modern art in America prior to the 1910s. He staged the very first show of Matisse in America, the very first show of Picasso in America. And when the stuff is still wet, right, like 1907, 1909. And it's through contact with works of modern art in Stieglitz's gallery in New York that a number of American artists decide to go to Paris to see what's going on over there. But other than Stieglitz's group, most American artists kind of mired in 19th century traditions still, in the early part of the 20th century. And the one difference is the group that's around Stieglitz. So it makes sense that when Picabia and Duchamp, these modernists from Europe, arrive in New York, Stieglitz will be the magnet that attracts them, right? Because he's the one that has, he's attuned to modernism, to modern art, right? And this came from the fact that Stieglitz himself had gone to Paris, loved what he saw kind of part of his mission with Gallery 291 was to open the eyes of Americans to European modernism, right? He also hosted Picabia's very first exhibition, right? Now, in the picture that we see here, which is a lithograph after a collage, and I don't think I have the original collage to show you, it's meant as a portrait of Stieglitz. And Picabia had been doing a number of mechanical portraits of people, where he uses a machine of sorts as a symbol for the person. And this is really similar to ideas we've seen elsewhere, right? We think about all these mechno-men we've seen around, right? At the Bauhaus, in constructivism, right? Those are both later as well. But this idea of the intersection of machinery, industry, and humanity is something that's in a lot of people's minds. The difference for Picabia is that it really doesn't look at all like a person. There's no attempt to anamorphize the machine. So when we saw constructivist machines as people, we could kind of make out that, okay, that's meant to be the head, and that's an arm, and that's a torso, right? And the same thing's true sort of with the futurists who had machine men, the figure moving through space, right? Looks like an automobile. But it still looks, there's legs and arms and a torso and a head. But for Picabia, there isn't. It is the machine is the person, rather than a mechno-man, right? The machine is a symbol for the person. The machine is a stand-in, a surrogate, an avatar for the person, but not a machine man, okay? So he sees this as a sort of mechanical portrait of Stieglitz, and it's based on a camera, right? The old Bellows kinds of cameras, which are now kind of collector's items, right? So I just grabbed any old photo of one, so you get, because the whole thing folds up into a nifty little box, right? And when you open up the front, the Bellows comes out, and that gives you the chamber. That's what a camera used to need. They still do, right? But your cell phone, you don't understand it the same way. But what a camera needs is a dark chamber with something that opens up for, a fraction of a second. Let's light into that otherwise entirely black chamber, and that light then exposes onto the film, or these days onto your what do you call it? No, the lens is what lets the light through. The sensor, right? Your light sensor in a digital camera, right? But it still requires that dark room where no light hits the sensor or no light hits the film, that is then exposed for a moment, a millisecond, right? A fraction of a second that then allows the light to hit. Now, Picabia's camera is broken, right? You can see the extension with the lens at the top where it says ideal in Old Gothic script. And then you can see that the bellows themselves have been broken. In addition to that, the red part on the right is a gear shift, an automobile gear shift. So it's kind of like a collage. It's kind of like a synthetic cubist piece, bringing these different elements. And that's very Dada, right? This idea of juxtaposing things that don't belong together to create new meaning, because you excerpt it from one thing, add it to something else. And doing that, the artist's, right, Duchamp, the artist's role is to change the meaning of things. And all the artist has to do is to grab it and remove it from its original context, and that's enough to change the meaning. The toilet, right? The fountain. Okay? So in this case, we've got an automobile gear shift, we've got a broken camera, and by putting them together, the meaning starts to morph and become something that Picabia is creating, right? In other words, it's about the act of creation. It's about the idea behind it, more than it is about the object itself, okay? But these objects do indeed have meaning, right? The gear shift is in neutral, and that adds to the same meaning as the broken camera. Neither thing is currently working, right? A broken camera can't work. A car in neutral is idling. It doesn't do what a car is designed to do, which is to motor you from one place to the next, right? These things add up to the meaning, and it's meant to be somewhat satiric and somewhat critical, suggesting that maybe Stieglitz has lost his momentum. Maybe Stieglitz is not working as well as he had been before. And the saying in French still, ici c'est ici, Stieglitz, foi et mort, can be read two different ways. Here, it's here, Stieglitz. Faith and love, that's foi et mort, right? So here, it's here, Alfred, right? Or here, this is Alfred, this is Stieglitz, here, right? Here, this is Stieglitz here, right? Either way, he's suggesting that this has the direct relationship to him, right? Now, if we read it as here, this is Stieglitz here, that means it is definitely Stieglitz in neutral, right? Stieglitz coasting. Stieglitz not pushing the envelope as much as he used to. Okay? But if it's here Stieglitz, then it's an admonition, isn't it? Look here, look what's here, right? Maybe you'll find faith and love here. Right? So maybe it's also an admonition, and I think the wordplay is something that we saw all over the work of Duchamp, right? That idea of playing with language and playing with sounds. And I want us to read it both ways. Hey, you're in neutral, but hey, guess what? Here's a way to get out of neutral. Dada. Right? Here's the next big thing. Faith and love. Right? This is the future. So here it is, Alfred. Here's the next big thing. This will pop you back into gear. This will fix your camera up. This will push you into the next thing. Right? The next phase, if you will. So it's a double meaning. And again, with Dada works of art, we've seen double, triple meanings. Now, one of the interesting things about Picabia is after starting as a cubist, one of the things that both he and Duchamp are really good at is really precise rendering. Right? When we think about the chocolate grinder picture that we saw by Duchamp on Tuesday, right? Incredibly precisely rendered. Even the stuff that was sandwiched between the broken pieces of glass in that massive work in Philadelphia is precisely rendered. Both Picabia and Duchamp are really good technical draftsmen. And we see it throughout their works. And it will have a lasting impact on American art. So here's a small watercolor with pen. Machine Tourne Vite. it's machine. It's in the command form again, right? So this language in French is telling the machine to do something. Tourner with a Z on the end is plural command, right? Machine tourne vite, turn fastly, rotate quickly. Tourner, rotate, right? Vite, quickly, right? Sign at the bottom. And what it is a pair of gears with these precise circles that almost make it look like it's like he's working with the different proportions of the parts, right? That it's the kind of drawing you would see coming through the actual place where gears are manufactured, so that you could get the angles and the sweep of things just right. And the edges of it are all incredibly measured and precise, and the lines that delineate the forms are themselves equally sharp, precise, and regular. Right? There's a sharpness and precision everywhere we look. Now, the other thing that you see, in addition to the title and the gears, is that the two gears are numbered, 1 and 2. And number 1, it says at the bottom, is the woman, femme. And number 2 is the man, homme. Machines as sex, right? Gears meshing as a metaphor for men and women coming together. Again, these ideas he's sharing with Duchamp, and the two of them are good friends and work with these ideas a lot. And if you think about it that way, then all of a sudden you realize that if number 2 turns a little bit, the man, the woman spins out of control. Because that's the way the different gear ratios work, right? So how many turns of the big wheel does it take to make the little wheel go around all the way around, right? About 1/5 of a circuit. Does that make sense, right? It's like, think about your bike in your in 10 speed. You're in 10th gear, right? You got the big sprocket on the front. Granted, bikes are now like 18 speed, but you get, big one on the front, the small one on the bottom. And when this one turns just this much, the back wheel just goes crazy, right? And vice versa. Okay? And so what he's suggesting is perhaps that, women are set in motion by men. Right? That doesn't take much effort on the part of men to, and this is very sexist, isn't it? It's totally sexist. And one of the things we're going to find is this, as they might say in French, quelle surprise, right? Look at Duchamp. Oh, I told you I was going to bring that thing in by Duchamp, didn't I? Yeah, right. Oh, gosh. Well, okay. At the end of class. I'll stop 5 minutes early and do it then, okay? If I do it now, I run the risk of messing up the recording for the rest of class and not having the pictures on it, right? Because it's now recording what's up there, and it doesn't, if that comes off of there for a second, it doesn't know, right? So I will, so we'll wait 10. So at 1:35, we'll flip over and look at that last Duchamp, okay? So it's not a great surprise that it's sexist, and we saw already with Duchamp it's sexist, and we'll see with artists that come up in the next, out of this group, that where this group is headed. It heads in a rather misogynist way, right? Right. So anyway, again, what's important, I think, for us right now is to keep in mind, keep in the back of our mind, the degree to which the Picabist things are focusing very much on precise rendering, right? That will become a hallmark of some American art in the coming decades. More on this same idea of machines and sex, right? A spark plug labeled "Portrait of a young woman, a young American girl in the state of nudity," right? As a spark plug. So again, go back to the great glass, the large glass by Duchamp, right? She emits love gas that powers, right? And she's a magneto that generates the spark that powers the bachelors down below, whose motions turn the chocolate grinder. Right? This idea of machines that are powered by love, and relating them to automobiles, right? Engines, which were in the 1910s still a pretty modern thing, right? Still a pretty new idea. And here our spark plug is nothing more than a technical rendering of a spark plug, labeled with very technical lettering as well. So again, this is an idea that's running rampant between the two of them. A nice painting by Picabia during the same period up in the Baltimore Museum of Art with the title Reverence, which is actually painted at the very top, right at 12 o'clock. You can see the word up there. Reverence. Geometric forms, machine-like forms, less identifiable now, but certainly derived from machines, and painted in metallic industrial paint. So it's a slightly reflective gold and silver. In addition to this very, very precisely rendered thing, right? These two planes that seem to come out toward us, these perfectly rendered circles, everything sort of balanced around that large inner circle with that sort of precisionism that we've seen with Picabia and Duchamp's own work. It's again a senseless picture in a way. It's reverence to what? Reverence to the machine, maybe? Okay? But at the same time, there's an inscription at the bottom, right, which reads, an object that does not praise the past. It doesn't give elegy to past times, right? It does not eulogize the past, okay? What does that mean? Who the heck knows, right? It's intentionally senseless, and maybe it's a modern object, right? Something that doesn't eulogize the past is something that has its own intrinsic value. Its value does not come from its connection to the past, right? It doesn't rely on the past for its own valuation, its own importance. Maybe that's in part what he's referring us to with this, right? It's a little difficult to say for sure. People have suggested on the one hand that the thing itself is another of these sort of confectionery machines. This is a pastry press. This is in the literature out there, that the way it turns almost looks like industrial-sized bakery flour mixers, where you're looking straight down into it, and those two paddles become the things that mix frostings or pastry flours, right? But not necessarily directly illustrated. And that, again, suggests the sort of themes that he's sharing with Duchamp. Because pastries, right, delicacies are also part of hedonism, right? Pleasuring yourself in one way or another, right? Bringing yourself excess pleasure. And also can be seen, if it's cakes and whatnot, as part of the courtship ritual as well, right? So, and again, these are things that we saw with Duchamp. Another thing people have pointed to, and I think this is where the senseless title, right? The object that does not eulogize past times. Other people have pointed to the famous drawing by Leonardo of man as the measure of all things. The Vitruvian man. And in fact, when you start to look at the layout of the work as a sort of abstract version of this, it becomes sort of a fascinating idea. Again, as the machine as man. A machine as the surrogate for the perfect man here in the modern world. Right? So again, not the machine as a man per se, but the machine as a surrogate. The machine as an avatar for the man, as the symbol to the modern world of what Leonardo's drawing was a symbol to the Renaissance world. In New York, another of our Dada artists in New York is Man Ray. That was his stage name. His real name was Emanuel Radnitsky. And he took the stage name Man Ray because he was worried about anti-Semitism, having an overtly Jewish name. So he gave himself a stage name instead that took the focus off of that. He's really one of the more important artists of this period. And I'm kind of a fan of Man Ray. I really find his work interesting, right? He's friends with both Duchamp and Picabia in New York, already in 1916. He had started off as a kind of a quasi-cubist painter. There's a nice early work in the Phillips by him. I didn't bring it in. But on meeting these new Dada artists who have arrived in New York, striking up a friendship with them, Man Ray adopts Dada. The sort of senselessness, sense of humor, wackiness, the anti-art mindset that is Dada is picked up by Man Ray after 1915. So what we're seeing on the left here is a photograph of a assemblage of objects that he had made for a show in 1916, right? And the original is lost. Okay, so here's a photo. The original was black and aluminum paint on the background, scratched through and collaged. Okay, so he had this background that he's painted, the black and the silver that you see, the violin openings down at the bottom. Again, think Cubism, right, and the Cubist interest in musical instruments. And then over that was collaged a piece of paper, right? And then he said that in the original what he did was he simply took a artist palette and stuck his hand into it and put it on top of the paper, so that's his handprint, thus the self-portrait, the hand of the artist, right? And then he took this board that's got all this stuff on it and he attached from a doorbell system the actual electric bells at the top. So those were three-dimensional objects that were attached to the board, right? The bell from a doorbell. And gives you the sense that there are wires coming off of it. And down below is a real button for a doorbell as well. And in the show, people were coming up and pushing the button, and nothing happened, right? And they got frustrated. And again, it's this idea of anti-art, right? He wouldn't want it to happen, because if it did, then it's functional in a way, right? By cutting the wires, it makes it dysfunctional, right? It removes it from any kind of use whatsoever. It becomes just an object in its own right, and not something that's meant to do anything. Laying it now on the composition, you'll notice how those bells look like eyes, right? That's also part of calling it self-portrait. And in many ways, it's a humorous comment on his own effectiveness, right? Pushes button, nothing happens, right? What does the artist do? And if we go back to the thing of Picabia, right, with the gear shift in neutral, Duchamp saying, you know, we as artists can never make anything as beautiful as industrial designers can, right? There's this idea of sort of this armut, right? The poverty of modern art, the poverty of the artist. All of these ideas are percolating around within Dada, right? Now, like I said, that's the original. Now, this is a print that was made later in 1963, after the original, right? From a photograph. He makes a silk screen printed on the back of a piece of plexiglass in multiple colors. Okay? So the actual object, if you were to see it in the Smithsonian, it has, what we're looking at here would be a clear plexiglass surface, and the print is on the back of it. Okay? Now, what makes this kind of fascinating, and again, remember, Dada is about the ideas, okay? So if you think about how he made the original, the original object had, you laid down the silver and the black, you laid down the white over it, you laid down the handprint over that, and you bolted this stuff to it. Okay, so you're building it up from the back. But the way that he prints it on plexi, on the back of plexi, he's got to build it in exactly the opposite direction. Because the handprint goes on last in an opaque object. But on the back of the plexi, that handprint's got to go on first, doesn't it? And then the paper that's behind it on that, and then the background is the last thing he lays down. And it means that while printing it, he can't even see it. He's covering up the layers that show through the plexiglass. So he's undoing what he originally did, in a way, right? He's working the process backwards in making the print. And this is, and again, it's he's thinking about the process of, in this case, silkscreen, right? As a bearer of meaning. The actual process itself adds meaning to the work. Because what the process here does is to undo the work he'd already done. It's anti-art. You can say that, right? Yeah, this becomes this sort of mind game, right? But that's sort of what they're looking for, because the point is not the work of art, right? Going back all the way back to art. The point is not the work of art. The point of the ideas that lead to the work. Those are the work of art. And without this is why Dada is so important for good. Without this, you don't get performance art. Right? You don't get installations. The idea behind it is not the lasting object. Right? You guys go down to see Sarah's installation down in Clarendon. It's going to be gone in a month. Never seen again. And what's the point of doing something that's not going to last? Well, that idea is already here. Right? And the fact that the original object itself is not necessarily something that's all that valuable, right? Duchamp loves it when somebody drops a large glass and it cracks. It's like, wow. Right? The original object is not as important as the idea that created it. And for this reason, Dada artists are fascinated with the idea of making replicas of their own work. Right? Because the original... So, Duchamp's box full of all of his art, right? Traveling salesman's box. Multiple reproductions of it, none of which he really ever touches, right? He has the idea for it, somebody else cares. That's fine, because it's the idea that matters. So, Man Ray now working in print from a lost object, right? We're fairly rich in Man Rays around here. This is an airbrushed image, gouache paint, so it's opaque watercolor paint that's been airbrushed, covered with pen and ink, pencils and whatnot. And the title, Seguidilla, is from a Spanish dance that he had seen. And he said that the arrangement of objects here, which seem almost like a mobile, sort of floating in air, were inspired by the dancers he had seen performing in the Spanish dance. And Man Ray is very much interested in dance as a theme. We'll see it come up again. What he does is he translates the dancers into objects. Again, like Pacabia, right? They're not mechnomen, but they are surrogates. They're not necessarily machines in this case. They're fans, it looks like, right? Hot weather, fan yourself kind of fans. Now, let's see. Airbrush, right? He called these aerograms with the idea that he had been trained originally as a sign painter, as a commercial artist. So before becoming a fine artist, he knew how to work with airbrush. And he loves the idea of airbrush and using stencils. And you can see some very precisely rendered objects at the top on the right as well. Things that look like lamps upper left. But the airbrush allows him to, again, not actually touch the object he's creating. Right? To remove the airbrush is for Man Ray what the ripped up paper was for art. Right? And the stenciled objects are for him what stencils were for Braque and Picasso. A way of layering information onto the surface and the incorporation of these sort of mechanized means. Again, everything gets made and remade. So he takes the basic design of the original on your right and he does, again, prints of it. And just like the original on the right, where with stencils you're playing with the idea of the order in which things are laid onto the surface, how they're stacked up. And the prints, which again, this is printed on the back of a piece of plexiglass, reverse that ordering, where the thing that was on top, the last thing you put down in the original, has to become the first thing you put down in the reproduction, right? difficult thing to think through. Right? But he loves these objects. They become sort of pristine. And I think the idea of just printing them on the backs of plexiglass is probably picked up from Duchamp, sandwiching things between glass as well. Right? Another of these prints on the back of a piece of plexi. Right? Again, after an original. So playing with the reversal, the laying down of objects, we have again gears, similar to what we saw in Picabbia's work, whose work he knows, right? The meshing of gears. The original was very similar to Duchamp. This is the original. It's in the Pompidou Center in Paris, right? And it was, again, sandwiched, cracked glass, right? Broken glass with things sandwiched in between. These Man Ray precise drawings of the different gears meshing together. And you could look at it from both sides. I have never seen it myself, so I can't tell you, but I have seen photos of the back, and you can see the word dancer on the back as well, which means it's layered in there twice, right? On the front and the back of that gold set of gears at the top. Now ours is, again, printed on plexi, so it's only one set of silkscreen ink on the back of the plexiglass, right? And it doesn't try to pick up the cracking pattern of the work. Now, what to talk about next? You'll notice in ours how the C of dancer picks up the inner part of the open mesh gear that's bolted in the middle, so that the inner row of teeth of that gear, which don't, by the way, mesh with anything, right? But if you trace that inner part of that gear around, it hits the bottom lip of that C and makes it look like a G, right? And on the original I read that there was a smear of lipstick on the letter to make it look like a G. Again, sandwiched within the glass, right? It was a little smear of lipstick on the tip of that precisely drawn C. You'll also notice that the CG, whatever letter it is rendered as a perfect circle in this particular font that he's chosen, right? And that's certainly to make it part of the machine that we're seeing too, right? To make it related to the machine that we're seeing. Now, the fact that it was originally a piece of lipstick, and the fact that he's morphing these two words together, dancer and danger, is again going back to this idea about eroticism. How does he feel when he sees the dance? Right? There's a danger in erotic attraction, is what he's saying. And that idea that erotic attraction can be dangerous is rampant in early 20th century art. Right? Think Picasso and the Demoiselle of Avignon, right? They're prostitutes, and they look frightening. Think of Duchamp and the Bride Stripped Bare, where the bride up above looks like a praying mantis who devours her mate. Picabia is also sort of tapping into this fear of intimacy that is running through a great number of early 20th century works of art. And the lipstick ties into it, the linking of dance and danger links into it as well. Now the title, L'Impossible, which you can see on the print at the bottom, which by the way would have been the first thing he printed on it, a title before there's anything else there, right? Because everything else comes on the back of that, which is kind of cool in its way, right? So that was the first thing that Picabia has when he's making a copy of this, is he's got a piece of plexiglass with the title and his name and the date. He doesn't have anything else on it yet. It's a non-piece of art that he's then going to build on. Right? But why does he call it impossible? Well, if you look at it, the way the gears mesh, two gears work, right? One turns the other, just like in Picabia, the machine turned quickly, right? Revolve quickly. But you put a third gear in and it freezes it up. Three gears can't turn. Because as soon as this one starts to turn this way, it'll push this one, right? This one turns this way, it turns this one this way, and it turns this one this way, and they lock each other together. It's a machine that doesn't work. Right? We're revealing the guts of something that is frozen in place. It simply cannot turn. And one wonders if this is not something of a comment on Picabia, right? On his machine turned quickly, and saying that there's some impossibility in all of this, right? The dancer doesn't get to dance. That then frees us from the possibility of the danger. Right? He again said all of this was influenced by having seen Spanish dancers, right? Having been and witnessed a performance. And for Picabia, or excuse me, for Man Ray at least, this led to these erotic feelings that for him were problematic. After the war, Man Ray moves to Paris. 1921, Man Ray moves to Paris, spends most of the rest of his career in Paris, where at that point there was another Dada group growing in Paris in 1921. Right? And when he's there, one of the things he turns to is photography. He almost gives up entirely making things and starts taking pictures. He loves photographs. And he comes up with a process that's very similar to what we saw Moholy-Nagy doing, which is where he's going to make photographs without a camera. Remember when we saw Moholy-Nagy, we saw those, what did we call them? We called them, not pictograms. This is a radiogram. He calls it photograms. Photograms. Right? Man Ray comes up with the same process. In fact, he beats Moholy-Nagy to it by a year or two. And he calls him after himself, a rayograph. Right? But he's playing with the idea of his Man Ray. Right? He's a man, rays of light. Right? But he's doing the same thing Moholy-Nagy did, which is to take the photo plate in a bigger dark room. Right? So the camera is a dark room. Okay? It's a tiny little dark room. But the same process will work in any room without light. That you take this photosensitive paper there, you expose light for a second, and the paper will change. Right? And all you got to do is lay things on it and see what happens. Man Ray had no way of knowing what was going to happen. The camera makes it all precise. Right? You dictate how long the shutter will be open. You dictate how wide the shutter will open. The f-stop and the shutter stop. Right? Shutter speed. You dictate all that. But with a rayogram, it's just chance. You flip a switch and you wait. And turn it back off again. And so in this case, he's laid things directly on the paper, a strip of film, a strip of movie film on the right. And what I don't know how he did this, right? A gyroscope spinning over the top of the paper on a wire. So he must have had the light on the other side of the gyroscope. Got the gyroscope moving. You know gyroscopes, right? Once that thing on the inside spins, it'll sit on its edge like a top. And it'll balance on a wire. Have you ever seen one of these, a gyroscope? No? I had one as a kid and played with it, right? Does anybody know what a gyroscope is? Jamie isn't. Because we didn't have cell phones, right? We had these great toys. Okay, so a gyroscope is a frame. You didn't have cool toys either. Okay, so the gyroscope, right? This is the center of the gyroscope, and there's a bit in the middle that's. So the gyroscope is this bit here, and this spins in this frame. Okay, the frame is here, like this, and that goes through the frame, right? And in the middle of it, around that circular frame, is this thing that will spin. So what you do is you take a piece of string, you wrap it around the top, right? Get it going, and then you've got the frame, and it spins on the inside, and then you set it down, and it will sit up. straight up right on the pin, right? And it'll on a string, right? It'll hold, so you know what it is, you know what it's called.
Is it different? We had a TV show called Beyblade, and that's exactly what they line
And you
up.
would just
And then it'll just sit on the smallest things, right? Okay, so that's what we've got, right? It's a gyroscope on a certain, those are called, see, you learned something. Those are called gyroscopes, right? So,
Now imagine taking two together with battling each other.
that's exactly right. But what's funny is, of course, you
That's what yours.
think more about doing that above a piece of photosensitive paper, and how do you ever know what that's going to look like when you're done? There's absolutely there's no way light going around and through a moving object that itself might move on that string, right? How does Man Ray, when he starts, have any idea of what the finished product's going to look like? None, right? Absolutely no way of knowing. Isn't that just perfect Dada? Right? Art dropping the papers, not knowing where they're going to land, right? It's the idea of chance. Okay? And it's also the idea of time elapsing, which of course the movie frames are as well, right? Although the figure in the movie frames doesn't seem to be moving at all. So really fascinating sort of ideas, again, coming out of Dada during this time. Two other Man Ray objects, Dada objects that he starts to make as he's shifting over to photography. One of the most famous, The Gift. Actually, it's just called Gift, not even The Gift. In French, Cadeau. This one was made for his very, very first Paris show. It's a ready-made. It's just an old-school iron, right? So back in the day, before electric irons, you heated the iron on the stove and you used it. You guys know this because you're fat. So he took one of those and he glued a bunch of tacks to it. And that's it, right? It's a ready-made. It's Duchamp taking a postcard and drawing something on it, right? He's altering it like Duchamp did so that its original function is utterly negated. If you tried to use this as an iron, A, you couldn't lay it on the heat source in the first place, and B, even if you did get it hot, right, you're just going to rip to shreds anything that you try to iron that does the exact opposite of what an iron is supposed to do, which is to press things flat, right? And instead, it simply tears it to ribbons. And he even said that one time in a quote. He said, you could just tear a dress, to shreds with one of these things. And then he went on to say, I did this once. I decided I'd try to use it and see what happened. I did this once. And then he said he gave the shredded dress to a dancer and just watched her perform. And he said, I could see her body through this. Again, totally misogynist junk, right? But again, this idea of the object that changes everything, changes its meaning, right? This degrading objectification of women is something that the Dada movement becomes surrealism. This group of artists in Paris now, 1921, will morph into the surrealists. And the surrealists are very much objectifying when it comes to their imagery of women. And Man Ray's ideas are already pushing us in that direction here in 1921. Again, replicas. He continued to produce replicas throughout his entire career, right? Into the 70s, he's making replicas. He even told museums, I don't mind if you make replicas and sell them as my work. I don't care. Because again, for a Dada artist, it's the idea that matters, not the object itself, right? So there are numerous of these floating around, so to speak, right? Sitting around in numerous collections all over the world, and we've got one in the Smithsonian American Museum. Our last work by Man Ray, and one of his more famous ones, is again this Dada object assembled from different disjunctive things. It's a metronome, right, for music practice. Tick, 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 tick. And he just simply took a photo that he had taken of an eye and paper clipped it. Didn't even glue it, right? paper clipped it to the metronome. And if you know metronomes, right, the thing at the bottom determines how fast the metronome goes, right? So the further up it is, the slower it will go, right? That's the way that works. The further down it is, the faster, right? It's like a speed skater. With their arms out, they go slower. With their arms in, or not, ice skater, yeah, right? So when you come in, things go faster. So what's interesting is that by putting the I there, he negates where you put the weight, because that adds the weight to the top as well, and will change the speed with which it goes back and forth. Right? So it's again a kind of a senseless object. Now, this is a copy. The original in 1922 was in a show in Paris, and the original was titled Object to be Destroyed. Right? That's sitting up there with this sort of senseless Dada title, and someone came in and said, okay, and destroyed it. Right? They took the title and said, fine, that I will do a Dada thing with your Dada work, and destroyed it. So Duchamp, right, immediately made a new one, and then made it in multiples, and he called the new one the indestructible object. Because the point was that, okay, go ahead and destroy this one too, but it doesn't matter because it's already made, right? It's mental. It's the idea. And you can destroy it as many times as you want, and he'll still have the idea. And he can just make more based on that. So the object is not the object, right? This is a comment on where art is. Where does art lie? Art lies in the conception of the work of art, not in the execution of the work of art. Right? The object is indestructible because the object isn't this thing. Right? Sorry, Jamie, this thing that's in the picture, not this screen, right? The object isn't this thing. The object is the thing between his ears, right? The object is the thing that's in his head. Yeah? And like I said, that's I think what makes Dada for me so sort of fascinating, because I do think that making art is more than just aesthetics and more than just hand-eye coordination, that it is about having something to say, having an idea that you want to try to get across. At least it should be. And Dada forefronts that. Make sure that we understand that that's really maybe the most important thing about art. Now we're going to bop over, as we try to wrap up Dada, to look over at other countries. It becomes international, especially after the war. There are Dada centers everywhere, right? There's a big group of Dada artists in Berlin, and in Berlin it sweeps up all of our friends who had been expressionists. Sort of gets swept up into Dada Berlin. So George Grosz, whose etchings we looked at, right, becomes a Dada artist and a core figure in Dada Berlin. And Dada was attractive to them because they too are distrustful of modern society. They're very critical of where the world has gone. They are reacting already against the war. And Dada Berlin begins to sweep these artists up into its own critique of the modern world and war. And so we've seen Grosz before. We've seen his comments about the war. But at the same time he's doing these, he's becoming a central figure in Dada as well. Loves working with collage and assembly. In this case, it's a photo collage. I wouldn't call it a photo montage because that means you take a photo of the thing you put together, right? You clip together the negatives and you make something. In this case, he's got a bunch of photos and other things that he has pasted together. So we've got this head, one of the eyes turned upside down. There's another eye on the ear, a different mouth over the mouth. Looks like a lab coat, maybe, right? Or a barber's coat, because this thing off his shoulder is an old straight razor. I can't imagine how men ever shave with these things, right? Just, I can't even imagine. And when I see movies when people get shaves with one, I just like cringe, right? A huge question mark over the top of his head, and two buttons, actual physical buttons, sewn into the canvas up above, right? I don't know if that's a real spark plug or not over his nose, or if that's a real tire or just a photo of a tire on his shoulder and deflated up above over here. Again, a senseless title, Uncle Auguste, the unhappy inventor, but meant to be a political statement. The photo that he started with for this is the first president of Germany after the war, right? President Friedrich Ebert, the president of the Weimar Republic. So he's using that as the basis for this satiric collage of elements, right, that deconstructs his name. I also like the buttons down below, right, sewn right onto the canvas too. Right? Mary, does that want to make you do something different with your senior project? Sew some buttons onto your project. He loves working with photo montage as well, right? And again, this idea of bringing together objects. This is the Dada part of it, right? Bringing together objects in a senseless manner. A manner that often negates their original intent. At the same time, this is definitely centered around the idea of crime and punishment. We have a bloody bully club, photo of a bloody bully club, a fingerprint from a crime scene, pair of handcuffs, right? Another collaged face with one of the eyes flipped upside down, the inside of a jail cell. Right? But working in montage in a way of sort of altering meanings of various things. All part of Dada Berlin. Dada had already begun to make its inroads into Berlin in 1917. And Raoul Hausmann is one of the earliest artists in Berlin that begins to do these photomontages, these sort of Dada, senseless amalgams of things. And he even claimed to have invented the process of photomontage, right? Where you take the different photos and make a photo of that. It's different than a collage, right? The collage is a one-off. This is reproducible, which is important for Dada, right? It has to be reproducible because it's the idea more than it is the object. Right? So Hausmann is one of the very first to sort of work with photomontage, but this becomes one of the hallmarks of Dada in Berlin. We'll probably quit with, okay, computer. There we go. Okay. We'll probably quit with this one, and then wrap up Dada, I guess, next week. One of these great, now this is a collage, right? This is not a photo montage. This is a single object, not meant to be reproduced. Hannah Hoke and George Gross were involved for a bit. The title, Senseless, cut with the kitchen knife Dada through the last Weimar beer belly cultural epoch of Germany. You can kind of make some sense. Kitchen knife cuts through something, just like the word Dada cuts through the sentence. Right? What is it cutting through? The last beer barrel belly cultural epoch of Weimar Germany. Right? Weimar Germany is this regime immediately after the war where German economy starts going again. It gets very, very prosperous, but as we've seen with George Gross, prosperous for the few. Right? She calls it the beer belly cultural epoch. In other words, getting fat on nothing, on empty calories, right? That's what a beer belly is, yeah? You've gotten fat even though you're not eating that much because a beer has got a ton of calories, right? And a big old German Stein, even more so, right? So, and the kitchen knife, right, is something, at least in the 1920s, associated with women more than men. Male chefs are not as prominent, but home and kitchen knife, right? Not necessarily restaurant knife. Yeah, and she, as a woman artist, thinking that she's going to be the one cutting through, just as she would preparing food in the kitchen, right? And it's filled with all these wonderful images that come together in the same way that Gross's did, right? So we have these terrific sayings, right? Ha ha. Look, little man or young man, Dada is no art movement. Dada is not an art movement. Dada lies. lies of Dada, but Dada as a verb. Dada tells lies over here. There's Ebert again, the president. What else do we see here? The gears and machines have been a standard Dada motif repeatedly. Again, sort of senseless juxtapositions of things everywhere we look. This is Ebert the second time up here. Large ant working its way through. But sort of thoughtfully put together in a way that suggests nonsense. That makes sense. Thoughtfully put together in a way to remove sensibility. Right? There's Katie Kollwitz's head, like a balloon. Remember Katie Kollwitz, a German expressionist artist, right? Almost like a balloon being played with by that figure down below, that headless figure, maybe lost their head, right? But it makes it look almost like it's like a helium balloon floating away and come back, right? There's Karl Marx. There's Lenin, right? Die große Welt, the big world, and down there Dada, cutting across it as well. The animals themselves morphed, sometimes heads put on, these are clown figures, right? Jester figures with those massive heads put on, making silly fun of everything. This ballerina with the two heads, one of the heads is George Gross here as well. So playing with all of these things, and again, heads that turn into these. There's the Grosse Welt, right? These machinery everywhere we look. A big fat baby's body with a bearded man's head the wrong way on it. Right? All meant to be at once sort of highly political, right? But at the same time humorous and satirical as well. Right? The map. The countries in black are countries where women could vote. Right? So there's a politics here as well. Germany, I don't think is one of them yet, right? So that's also part of the ideas that she's working with. Okay, what we're going to do now, we're not going to end. It's like I said, I was going to show you that last thing that Duchamp was working on, right? This will probably not. I have to turn. I'm going to sit over here for a second because I have to look at the screen to do this. Otherwise, I can't, since it's replicating this. So, see if I can find it here. All right. This is where it gets difficult. Oh, I don't think I've ever even translated. I'm just going to go to sites, because I took photos of this. They may or may not have come out. So when Duchamp, right, at the end of Duchamp's career, he gave up painting altogether, right? And he started playing chess, and methodical, repetitive action, right, a series of rules and whatnot. And everybody thought he'd stopped working altogether. And then when he died, in 1966, they went into his estate and they found this assemblage thing that he had made, right? Which was this, I don't know if I have a good idea. It's this wooden door, like a barn door, that's like 10 by 12 feet, right? And in it there is this tiny little peephole, right? At head level, okay? And you walk up to the peephole and you look in, and when you get close, you can see that there's something behind it that's lit, right? And when you walk up and you look in, there's this. Oh, hey, okay, here in a second. There's this dead body in the field, right? And it's just creepy, right? And totally misogynist too, right? This Dada misogyny we've been talking about, right? But he's working on this for. Why is that not doing his thing? Right? I tried to take these with my cell phone, right? It's very, very hard to photograph, right? But it's this latex rubber body in this field made of twigs, laying there, and the bit in the background behind it, right, is this. it looks like those old beer signs you used to see in, your dad's basement that said Coors, and there'd be a waterfall, and it would be trickling behind the glass with little lights coming down. You know what I'm talking about? Yes or no? Right? You ever seen these sort of advertising signs that look kind of like they're animated, but it's cheap sort of 50s animation where it's on glass, painted on glass, and then behind the glass, like those space heaters that look like fireplaces, right? Lights are sort of shining back there so that in the little sandwich of the glass itself, you can see things that look as if there's a waterfall. It looks as if the waterfall is actually falling because you see these things trickle down, right? So it's actually not still when you're looking in at it as well. And they found this, right? He had never exhibited it or anything. They found it when he died at the end. It's this phenomenal sort of thing. I'll see if I have a better picture of it.
Where was it?
It's now in Philadelphia, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So you go into the room with the great glass in it, and the new descending staircase is there, and the glider is there, right? All these things, 50 milliliters of Parisian air is there. This wonderful box full of, a cage full of what looks like sugar cubes. And on the bottom of it, where you couldn't see it if it was on a table, but they've got it elevated in a mirror, and it says, why not sneeze, Rose Salavi? And just, they're goofy, crazy, and incredibly funny things often, except for étant donné, which is, I'd have to ask Karen what that exactly translates into. Given state, something along those lines. Let's go up here. I might have a better picture of the door that I didn't take, right? That was my photo. Those are the same. They're the same three I've got. Alas, do I have up here? Yeah, so I don't have a better picture of it, but I do have, I think. Let's go back here. Sorry about that. There he is playing chess with a nude model in front of the bride stripped bare by her back during an opening of a retrospective of his works in the 1960s, right? And he showed up for it to sit down as a chess master at a timed chess match with a nude model as part of the installation, right? Again, this Dada's tough, right? I've seen people going like, oh my God, this is just crazy stuff, right? But I think it's the craziness of it and the sense of exploration and rule breaking that I think is a lesson for us all. And Duchamp always kept a sense of humor as he was working as well. He has my single favorite quote from any artist ever. He said, I don't want to get rich from my art. I just want to break even plus 10%. Which I think is just fantastic, right? What is getting rich? Paying all your bills plus having 10% more? Right? If I could break even plus 10%, I'd probably be rich by now. Right? I break even. Right? That's where your status quo. Anyway, and it's that sort of humor that we see there and with things like LHOOQ. And one of his ready-mades, right, was let's go back up here. One of his ready-made, and then we'll quit. One of his ready-mades was a snowplow that he hung from the ceiling and he signed, or a snow shovel, and he titled it In Advance of the Broken Arm. In other words, think about in advance of the broken arm. In other words, before the broken arm, right? What do you normally use a snow shovel, right? Out there in the snow. What happens when you're out there in the snow with the snow shovel? Right? Whoop, down you go, break your arm. Right? This is in advance of the broken arm. Right? And it's that sense of humor that Duchamp brings to, I think, everything he's doing. That it's tongue-in-cheek, thoughtfully tongue-in-cheek, right? But playful at the same time. For me, that's what has got me into Duchamp, right, was that element. Okay, we're only 5 minutes early, but that's fine. We'll wrap up Dada. The next guy we're going to look at is really one of my favorites. And then we'll get into surrealism. So tomorrow morning is my plan to get your Dada essays back to you tomorrow morning. Maybe later this afternoon, but more likely tomorrow morning. With comments, I'll give you a nice sort of timeline for things. And we have one more movement essay yet to do, which is on surrealism. And after that, you'll be sort of just working on nothing but your papers for the rest of the semester. Okay?
The draft is due next week, isn't it?
Is it? Is the draft due next week? On Thursday? We'll talk about the draft on Tuesday then, okay? And I'll make sure that I don't pile things up. All right?
Yes, you do.